Well, talk about hitting your mark. I was waiting for that song to finish because sometimes I interrupt it and it bugs me. I'm just one of those people where it's like, let it play to the end. Okay. Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. It's Friday. It's live model time. It is noon Mountain time. It's 11 my time. I'm on the West Coast. I don't know what time it is for you, but I know that most of you, it's different times because we've got a great international audience. So I'm going to introduce Donovan. We've got Donovan with us today. I know I've been switching a lot, my co-hosts lately. We had Tyson for one and then Matt for the last one. And I've got my trusty steed, hope you don't mind me calling that, Donovan back. Donovan, you with me today?
I am, and I don't sound like a robot this time, so we're good.
That's great. That's good. That's good. You can hear his voice.
Yeah.
So Donovan, who do we have with us today? Anybody? I'm hoping our usual suspects are there, but I'm also always looking to reach new people. So I hope that this is a little bit. We're doing master planning. It's a little bit different. I hope that the net cast a little wider on this one. So why don't you give us some shout outs real quick before we dive right into it? And we won't take too long on the intro. People say I talk too much on the intro and I cut into my modeling time. We're going to get going here in just a second.
That's all right. We're all here to be in this together. And speaking of being in this together, the international audience we have for this content today is fantastic. We have people from Lebanon, from Beirut, from
Welcome.
India, Pakistan, Vancouver, another Vancouver, Washington, North Carolina, Argentina,
welcome,
Flint, Michigan, Ireland, Montreal. I don't think I said that right. Madagascar, Norway. My goodness, just Czech Republic, Puerto Rico. You've got quite the reach out there, Eric.
Pretty much
Korea,
everywhere.
UK, Istanbul, Toronto. Woo! Oh, yeah.
Well,
this is going to be fun.
I'll say this as sort of a segue. It doesn't matter where you live. We live in cities anywhere in the world, and they don't happen by accident. Sometimes they do, but you'll find that sometimes it's not a good thing. We do have to plan things to get sort of the results that we want, especially as laws become more complex and building standards become required. Especially for safety and things like that. So what does that mean for what we're doing today? You've got here behind me a starting point. We're going to start, I want to say from scratch, but at the same time, this is not something that you really should try to do, folks. Your disclaimer, don't do this at home. Don't try to do an entire master plan, both in 3D, in layout, and then rendered in Photoshop in 2 hours. So I'm going to cheat the process a little bit by having some stuff pre-built, because this is something that I had done as already in the past. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the whole process, but we're not necessarily going to have to do it step by step. And that's because a lot of it's repetitive. And so what we'll do is we'll cover the general principle. We'll kind of move on to the next step. I want to see if we can my goal is to get through this in 2 hours. I think we can do it. I'm confident.
Yeah, I think we could do.
Okay, well, if
it's not cheating, you're just well prepared.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, speaking of planning, planning is kind of funny because it's like setting up a structure and then it's saying things are not going to follow this plan exactly. And that's actually okay because it's a long range plan. So in this case, I've got a structure, but we don't have to follow it exactly. We're just going to hope that the pieces sort of generally fit into place. So with that, I'm going to shrink myself. And Donovan, any other housekeeping items, announcements, or anything, big things that we want to get out of the way? And then I will shrink myself and get to work.
Nope. One thing I want to remind everybody, as always, if you're watching us on another platform, whether it be Facebook or LinkedIn or elsewhere on the internet, and you have any technical issues there, we stream this directly from our YouTube channel. So if you're having issues on those platforms, come over to YouTube and hang out with us on YouTube.
Yeah, it's kind of the safest thing. YouTube is sort of what we used to do, just only YouTube. So it's relatively new that we're branching out to some of the other groups. So let me do that because I know the comments don't show up when I'm talking here. So I'm going to shrink myself so that our comments can show up. Speaking of the other streams, in this case, I might shrink our comments box just a little bit. Sorry, I don't mean to say that they're not important. They are, just I want to make sure that we don't cover too much of the screen. So anyway, yeah, that's it. Let's do this. So
Donovan, as always, I love to hear what people have to say. If I mess up, if there's a different way to do it, if blows anyone's mind, let me know those things. That's helpful for me as I'm going. Just kind of gives me a little bit of a gauge as to sort of the things that are resonating with our audience today. So.
Yep, I am your intermediary. If you have any questions for Eric that you want me to ask him, any ideas, thoughts, comments, concerns, whatsoever, just throw them up in the chat on whatever platform you're in, and I'll make sure to get it to him.
Yeah. So let's just get into it now. Some of you may have seen the graphic that was on our on the intro screen and the sort of the YouTube thumbnail. So while we were waiting, now that's sort of the final product. But I instead of showing that now, we're going to build up to that. So let's just kind of start the process. And then if I need to, I'll pop in and I'll reference the final product and say, this is our goal. Ultimately, if I just pull that last, I'm just going to give you a little teaser here. And that's just because, let me see, where did I saved it? I saved it to my desktop. And let me pop this up on my screen. So this is sort of this is a zoomed in version of sort of the final master plan. It's a much bigger plan. And I want to say that we don't have to do this in SketchUp. We could do this completely in Photoshop. So going from CAD to Photoshop, that's kind of been my experience. And I think that's still a lot of people's experience. Nothing wrong with that. But I want to say something really quick before getting started. Why did we do this in SketchUp and not just go straight from CAD to Photoshop? And the reason why is because this project, and I'm not going to give too much information about it because I'm not quite sure how much I'm allowed to say because I have asked if I could use this as a reference from a previous employer. But the details I don't know. Excuse me. I'm not sure about the. Try that again. So I'm not sure how much details I can share, but what I will say is that it was a competition. So we had about a week and it was a charrette. So a charrette is when you get all the designers into a room and you have someone doing buildings and you have someone doing landscape and you have someone doing planning and everyone's in the room and you just work through it until you get to a final solution. And those are really exciting. It means that we're basically compressing a project schedule from 3 months or 4 months or 5 months down to 1 week. So SketchUp played a pivotal role because we needed 9 renderings, we needed sections, diagrams, we needed to coordinate with the client, and then of course you need the master plan that you see, the illustrative. So that's why SketchUp was used, because it was so versatile, and it allowed us, all the deliverables came from the master model. So that's why I chose SketchUp and not going straight from a 2D to 2D workflow, as some people might be used to. All right, any questions before we get going?
No questions yet, but we do, just to call out some people, we have people from France, Nepal, India, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Vancouver, my old stamping ground, Montana, USA, and Czech Republic again. International audience for you.
Speaking of Vancouver, you may recognize this site. It's actually it's a sort of a government property that was sort of being that was sort of shared with the First Nations. That was sort of being conceptually developed as a potential, what can we do with this site? So I'll kind of give you a little bit of context. Downtown Vancouver, the West End is over here, so it's on the peninsula. So we had some contours to start with. So this was provided, I don't know where it came from. Again, we were working fast and loose like the Wild West. So we had some contours, but when you're making a mesh and you're dropping stuff on, you realize like my starting point is number one, to geolocate it. So you can see I geolocated it here just enough to make sure that my contours were sort of accurate with where it is in location. So I would double check a few things like the tennis courts. Those seem to be graded correctly. And I thought that's great. Now we can always use, if in a pinch, the location terrain, which works fine for most uses. But if you have contours, my advice is if you have contours from a survey or something, use that. It's probably going to be a little bit more accurate. So that was my starting point, was geolocate. Always, always, always. Even if I don't need real world shadows, just do it out of habit. So turn that off. Now that I know I'm geolocated, my contours line up with where we are in the real world. I have my property line here. My property line was just sort of drawn, I think, in CAD, and that was basically brought in to just align over the site so I know where. You can see that because it's 2D and 3D, I'm going to work vertically. I'm going to work stacked, because when you have 3D stuff, I like to work above in 2D, and then I'll bring information down onto the 3D when I'm ready. So the first part of this process is to I may want to come over here. I don't really need to, but I may want to weld these edges together just so I can get a cleaner extrusion. And then I would extrude this here. Now, why am I doing this? It's because I need the contours for a mesh. I want to mesh a base mesh, not just contours. And so I have a couple ways to do that. And what I want to do first, though, is think about how much mesh do I need? Like, is the beach part of the master plan? Probably not. I want as little as possible because this is going to be, I know this is going to be a very complex model. So I'm going to start by just grabbing what I think is enough to cover the surrounding roads of the site and the property line. So just going to give myself a little bit of breathing room. So I'm going to go ahead and group that. And then I'm going to select everything except this group. And I'm going to group the rest of the contours. Now, here's a choice that I have to make, is that if I might need these for like a planning diagram or something, I might come over here and freeze them. So I would put it on a freeze. I put an X on there so that my freeze always shows up at the bottom. And then I would come over here and just assign those to a freeze tag and turn that off. And the reason is because I really don't want to see it and I really don't want to work with it, but I don't necessarily want to delete it. And I could save it to another model. If my geometry is really heavy, I may take that and just save it to its own model. But for right now, we're just getting started, so there's no heavy geometry. Let's do this. So now I have just the mesh here. And I didn't need to do this extrusion. I didn't have to do that, but sometimes what I'll do is it just helps me kind of see exactly. Sometimes I'll use it as an intersect with model. So you'll see later I may intersect the mesh. So it just kind of tells me exactly where my property line touches the ground. So I may want to just hide that for right now. Yep. And Donovan, if anything is new to you or anything I'm going too fast on, you're kind of the voice of the viewer. So if I'm going too fast or if you want me to go a little more detail into any of these steps, let me know.
I can do that.
Okay.
I see some similarities between the work that you're doing now and the one that we did, I guess it would have been a few months ago, talking about landscape design on sloped areas.
Yeah,
Since
a little
what
bit.
you're looking at right now is pretty sloped.
Let me pull up my tool palettes. I don't know why they're not there by default. I like to have the large tool set up. I'm a keyboard shortcut person, like I encourage everyone out there to be, but at the same time, sometimes I'll refer to a tool for our newbies out there. We've got two choices. We can sandbox from contours, or we can do, which I've never really used a lot, but Fredo has one called Topo Shaper. So the difference is really quick. If you're wondering, first of all, Topo Shaper, like all of Fredo's tools, are very complex, which means that you have a lot of options. I tend to like less options because I don't want to think too. I just want to go, I want to click it, and I want to go to the next task. But the big thing is a quad mesh. So a quad mesh sometimes is just easier to work with than a triangulated mesh, what's called a tin. So if it matters to you, you may get a cleaner mesh with a quad mesh than you would with sandbox from contours. Now, I feel like we should, I don't know, I don't really want to try both, but I'm going to, for now, let's just start with sandbox from contours and see what that does. You also might, this is a big site, so the bigger site you have, the more geometry you have, the more we might see the spinning beach ball. That's perfectly normal. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means that it's processing more information. So if you, like here, I'm sandboxing what is, I think this is 100 acres. So I know in Canada, sometimes they're metric, sometimes they're imperial. So I think because I'm not in Canada, I'll probably sticking to imperial, but I might switch back and forth. But this gives us a time just to talk about movies and stuff while we're waiting. I haven't seen any new ones lately. Or I can read comments.
You neither, huh?
Yeah. I did see.
Although my son's birthday is next week, we're going to see Indiana Jones because he wants to see Indiana Jones.
Oh, that'll be fun. I did see the documentary that finally came out for rent. It was because Jurassic Park turned 30 years old this summer, which is crazy because I saw it in theater. I remember standing in line in a parking lot, in a hot parking lot, for like 3 hours to see it. When I was, if you want to do the math, folks at home, I would have been about 12 years old. Is that right? No, I would have been 11. Okay, here we go. Yeah, that's right. I don't know how old I am. So here's the mesh. If I turn on my hidden geometry, so what I mean is my triangulated network, right? So those that already know, it means that you're getting these triangles. So a tin basically finds it interpolates between the contours and it just connects it. So, I mean, visually, as far as what you're going to look like with the surface, I don't think you visually see the difference, but when you go to work with stuff, it may make a difference. So something to think about. So that's kind of the starting point. I'm going to switch models because I wanted to show you, I said I was going to start from scratch. I didn't really start from scratch. I started from contours. But what I need is a base mesh. And I need it in 3D. This is, before I go into the next step, sometimes it's nice to cut a section plane. And the reason why I do this is just to kind of I just kind of spend a little bit of time with the site and just kind of get to know it, like we're going to be friends. We're going to be spending a lot of time together over the next week. So in a charrette. So in this case, you can see there's kind of a little bit of a bench where it's already been graded, and there's a little bit of a drop off. But more importantly, I won't say significant, but there's a decent cross slope. So just so that everyone at home knows, if I grab a point here, I have to be careful where the point is because the section cut, if I draw it too close to the section cut, my line will disappear. But if I just kind of snap a point there, and then I draw a line somewhere about here and lock to the blue arrow and reference that, I can grab that line and I can tell you right now that that's 124 feet. And if I grab this line here, that's 1400. Now, I don't know about you kids at home, if your math is good. 124, if you're that quick at math, I'm not. 124 over 1400, that's an 8.85, so basically a 9% cross slope. So 9%, 10% is kind of that max that we'd want to do for roadways and things like that. Basically letting you know that this site has a decent cross slope, something to think about. The other thing to think about is views. So you'll see that when we go into the buildings in just a minute, is views. So I'm toggling my section off. I'm toggling my section plane off. I have keyboard shortcuts for that. That makes that fun. That's step one. Step one is get a base mesh, because everything from here on is going to drop onto that base mesh. So I'm going to switch over to, I do not have it open. So I'm going to switch over to a more complete model, because to me, this is not about just modeling in SketchUp, because we have so many of those tutorials out there, and we have so many of those live streams out there. This is about moving information from SketchUp or into SketchUp, and then setting it up so it can move out of SketchUp. I'm opening up the final file. That's why it took just a second. It's quite a large file. So let's see here. What do I want to do? I think I'm going to turn everything off, and I want to build it up. We're going to talk for a minute about the fun that is working with CAD files. And for those of you at home, hopefully, I just turned everything off and then I turned it back on. I should have one. Can you turn there you go. You can turn everything off. I sometimes forget that you don't have to click through each one. You can turn them all off at once by selecting them. So what I'm going to do is come over here to my styles, and I'm just going to grab my standard sort of working style. You can see here that I have my contours and my base mesh. So this is you can't really see the base mesh. Maybe I need to change my background style just briefly for this, just to give myself a background color. I tend to work black and white, and I have a reason for that. You guys all know that. Where is my background? Blocks. Should be there. Oh, I see why, because I turned it all off. That's why. Okay. Let's see. Yep. Okay. Actually, it doesn't really matter, because when I go hidden, because it's already got its color. So what I'm doing now is basically the contours I don't need. The contours were only to generate the mesh. I'm going to keep the contours in my model just in case. But the step here that's really tricky, and this is what I do not want to do live in front of y'all, because as much as it's fun to watch me kind of fail live on screen, this won't be fun, because this is about importing CAD in pieces. So as a team, we had a person in CAD, or even sometimes two people in CAD, because the site plan needed it in CAD because you run statistics and stuff, and you're doing that in real time. And so as much as you can do reports and things in SketchUp, when you know that things, you have to make sure your area takeoffs, you're moving polyline boundaries and things in real time, and you're staying in 2D, for people who know that CAD workflow, that can be a really easy and that can be a really quick CAD workflow. When you get in 3D, it gets a little bit more complex. It's not to say you can't generate reports and boundaries and things like that. It's just, it gets a little bit trickier. So that's why CAD was kind of the foundation for the parcels and for the road network and stuff, keeping the center lines, making sure that all the center lines hit where they needed to and stuff like that. So I'm not going to import the CAD here because sometimes it comes in out of scale and then I have to scale it and stuff like that. But you can see that as CAD pieces became available, what I would do is I would import that CAD into SketchUp, and I would either use a reference point like the property line or a model origin so that each thing brought in, it snapped into place, or if it didn't snap into place, I would try to make sure that the CAD exports had something like a property line so I could use that to snap. And that's really important because what we want to do is make sure, like if I drew a line here vertically, let me see here. I'm just going to snap it to a road. And you can see here, I'm in parallel projection mode, but the corner of that road here on my base, on my 3D base, hits that road, hits that parcel. So you can see that I'm hitting, everything is hitting perfectly vertically. So whenever I bring something in, especially when CAD revises, because we're working in real time and they're like, client wants to move a road. And it's like, okay, bring in the new CAD, bring in the new road, clip out the piece of the mesh or clip out the part of the parcel where the road goes through, and then bring in that clean mesh again and then drape the new road back on top of it. So the biggest challenge with topography, for those of you that have done this before, is when the CAD changes on you and you've already draped it and you've already begun to build your base mesh. So trying to be flexible and thinking ahead, for me, is the goal.
So all of this is done on land, like completely undeveloped land, which is why you're saying that they could easily reroute roads and make changes. Not on the fly, but
it has development now, but we're just kind of pretending like we have the permission to sort of scrape it clean. It's like an army base or something. So there's a couple of utilitarian buildings and there's sort of a functional road network that's there now. But you can see that part of the proposal was to reconnect the existing street grid, right? So this connecting high to low, and then bringing in an internal street grid. So this urban, bringing it from like more of a suburban sort of pastoral feel because it's a military base, and bringing in that sort of urban street grid. So one of the design concepts was, as the top of the hill is sort of like the more natural element, and then as you move from the top of the hill down, so this would be moving from the southwest to the northeast, there is kind of this, you kind of move through not just the building typologies change from a little bit of a lower density to a higher density, but also from a little bit more natural to a little bit more urban. And I'll tell you that works pretty well, because you can see with the cross slope here is that you can, because you have existing housing on around the periphery, the idea of going taller at your low point actually worked really well, because it helped kind of preserve certain sight lines to the bay, which I know in Vancouver, and not just in Vancouver, in a lot of places, view cones and sight lines, especially to natural elements like mountains and water. It's very important to preserve. So I'm not going to do this right now, but what I would do for those that haven't done this, if anybody's watching that hasn't done this, you have to kind of pretend here, or what I could do is, let me pop over here, and I'm just going to grab this mesh really quick. And I will do a part of this, but I don't want to do the whole thing because it's going to get a little messy. I'm going to paste this clean mesh, the one that doesn't already have all of my pieces, all of my sort of, call it design, draped onto it. Here it is. And let's just take that and switch that to a new tag. And for the sake of argument, I'm going to go ahead and take out, just for the sake of argument, I'm going to take these contours out because I already have them. In this model. So if I was smart, I would have, I'll say that several times. If I was smart, I would have done it a little bit differently. What I really wanted to do is basically, see what I need to do here is, let's see, turn that off, come over here and basically just align this. I had two different, let's see, I'm just going to kind of eyeball this for right now.
So Patrick O'Brien is chiming in saying, I love the layering approach with the CAD files. And then we've gotten a couple of reminders that you need to save.
Yes. Well, I haven't done anything yet on this one because I started in a model, and then I just brought in, and all I've been doing is turning tags on and off. So because I've already pre-built this, so you're right though. Thank you. We do need to save, especially with big models like this. Definitely make sure you're saving, because if you're trying to run something like clean up edges, or if you want to drape something onto a terrain, save before you do that. Okay, so for this one here, what I wanted to do was basically get something, and I don't need it perfect for this example, so just forgive me there. I just wanted to say, okay, now I've got this kind of parcel grid. So this is a street grid, and then this is my terrain. And if I go into plan view, you can see that they line up generally where they would go. And that's why I'm working vertically. And now there's different ways to do this organization. You could bring these in all together and then just have it pre-grouped in CAD, so you can pre-group stuff if you knew things weren't going to change. Or you can just bring them in pieces. So you would import the road network, import the parcels, import the building footprints, import the pathways, import, tree placement. If you're doing tree placement in CAD, which to me, I'm just as fast, or I enjoy it more to do trees in SketchUp. But you could totally do them in CAD as well. So in this case, I'm going to save. Thank you. And because it's a big file.
So I think here's a question: is doing all of that, like there was a comment made, big file, does it bloat the file too much to have all of that information in one place?
No. Yes and no. Yes is that, like, all done. I'm at 8 million polygons, and that's everything. We haven't shown you the buildings yet, because what I want to do is work my way up. So I'm pretending as if we're starting with just the base mesh that I created just now in that other file, that starting from scratch file. And then I've imported my CAD line work, and I've sort of made sure that everything sort of stacks vertically or is aligned vertically. So that's kind of where I would be starting. But this file has everything. This is a finished file, so it has everything in it. So I'm at 8 million total, but you'll see in just a minute when we get into most of that geometry is in the buildings, because they were done in Rhino. So poo-poo Rhino, because, and nothing wrong with Rhino, I'm kidding. But Rhino loves, working with NURBS and vector elements. Rhino wants to add more detail, where SketchUp is sort of saying, you don't need that detail. So don't add that detail if you don't need it. So when you're modeling buildings in Rhino and you bring them in to SketchUp, you're going to get, I think anyone who's done this before, you're going to get more information than you need. So that's where I think when we talk about bloat, you're going to have it. But working with 2D CAD with topo mesh and trees and stuff like that, all the things that I'm used to working with, no, totally fine. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that answers the question.
Well, but that's a good point, because I'll talk about organization, because when you get the buildings from Rhino and they're really heavy, that's where organization is going to come in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is, just as a test, let's see if this works. And I saved. So I'm going to take this road network and this parcel network, my parcel boundaries, and I'm going to go ahead and drape it onto my mesh that we just created from the other file. And I'm keeping an eye on the time, because I told you I wanted to do 3 things today, which is pretty ambitious. I want to not just build the model from scratch, but I kind of want to give the methodology for how to organize a model, knowing that we're going to go to layout, knowing that we're going to go to Photoshop ultimately. So that's why I'm only hitting on just parts of these. I already said that. I'm hitting on just parts of these process, rather than saying, let's do the whole road network. Let's do all the trees. Let's do all the... So this is where the beach ball, again, you have a big mesh. If you have contours with a lot of detail, you can always change the amount of detail depending on, it's master planning. So I have to remember it's master planning, right? It's not engineering. It's not going to get built. It's competition. This is about big ideas, and and you're in a charrette environment. It's about working fast. So ultimately, it's okay to sacrifice. If I want to run in simplify contours, which is an extension, just to sort of reduce that detail, or if I want to alternate, instead of running 1 meter contours, I might run 5 meter contours. You're going to lose a little bit of detail, but you're still going to have your top of slope, and you're still going to have your bottom of slope. You're still going to get that cross slope. You just might not have sort of the refinement level of detail on the existing slope, but ultimately this is going to get regraded, right? So I think as long as you have the general cross slope, and you know that your perimeter edges are fixed and you're not changing those, then as far as the property line, what's inside the property line, I think it's okay to say, switch to 5 meter contours. I've done that before myself too, where it's like, no way, the site is, 50 hectares, and there's no way I'm working with 1 meter contour meshes. Absolutely not. And the haters, if there's any, hopefully there's none in this group, I know, but I've heard this and say, well, SketchUp should be able to handle, well, maybe, but I'm okay. I accept SketchUp, as it is. I don't expect it to be something that it's not. You know what I mean? Right, Donovan?
Yep, I'm right there with you.
I love what SketchUp does well, and I spend more time thinking about and that. Speaking of which, I probably should have just done one parcel because this is just an example, but that's okay. It gives me a chance to.
Yeah, that rainbow wheel of death is.
Yeah, you'll notice that, like, it's like I tell people, like, when I'm training in live training, okay, look, folks, hands up, don't start clicking keys a bunch of times, because that's when you send it into a cycle where it stops. It gets confused and it says, wait, what are you telling me to do now? So I just like, hands up. I also don't mind. I also take a lot of coffee breaks too. So I have no problem just being like I'm running a task. It's going to take a couple of minutes. Go get a cup of coffee. But what I was saying is that, like, what was I saying? I was saying that it's easy. It's easy to want more from, like, a program and say, oh, you do these things so well. Like, I want you to also be able to do all these other things. And I used to be like that too. And I kind of learned that, like, I just enjoy the things that's how it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be like that with people too. Like, I'm not trying to change you. Now, if this does take another minute, I might exit out because I've already explained, the deal. The other thing is, and I'll say this, and I'll give it one more minute, but sometimes what I've found is that when you have a lot of line work, first of all, do it in pieces. So, like, you do the roads first. You wouldn't worry about getting curb edges, master planning detail. You don't do the curbs, and you don't necessarily need to do crosswalks. You can always do those in pieces. So you can say, okay, I'm going to do this piece, then I'm going to do this piece and this piece. And that's just a little bit safer, especially when you're collaborating, because you could sit there and say, okay, this piece of the site is done. So I can hand that off, and I'm going to move on to, the other side of the site.
Somebody brought up a point, and I myself am relatively new to the Mac world, so I don't know the answer to this one. But somebody said it would be nice if you could stop a process by hitting Command or something like that. Is there an ability to stop a process?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think I just did it, which is not what nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to say, like, I had to quit it. And which is also why I think which was good timing for somebody to say save, because this is why, you save before you run any complex task. And it's not just SketchUp, but it's, and like when I'm rendering or something in V-Ray, it's like before I go and do, like, a really challenging thing, I'm going to ask a lot of processing power from V-Ray. I would do the same thing, save it just to be safe. Okay. So anyway, we're going to do one. I'm just going to do one because what I want to do is I want to make a point. I wanted to make a point that sometimes drape doesn't work as well. So you'll see that what I'll do is, depending on the complexity of the parcel, I may actually just do this. I'll copy a piece, just the piece that I need. It might be that let me see here. I'm going to come in here and explode. It's because when I ran Sandbox from Contours, Sandbox will automatically group. So I've got a group within a group within a group. It's my inception joke that I like to make when I'm working in SketchUp, is that I want to sort of get rid of some of those nested groups so that I just have the outer container and then I have the raw geometry. And then the only reason why you would have multiple groups is if you had multiple objects, like I was using as an organizational tool. Like I've got this kind of tree, and I've got this kind of tree, and this kind of tree.
While we are looking at that rainbow wheel again, somebody was asking what hardware you're using when you're doing this.
Yeah, I used to feel like, up until this moment right now, I felt like I've been doing really well. I have a 2017 iMac Pro. I think what it is this is something, I think that we could have been better off if we had used Topo Shaper from the beginning. And then I think that the tin is putting in more triangles than we need, and the quad mesh would have actually simplified. So I'm going to plug Fredo's Topo Shaper here, and say that if you're working on these big sites, you may want to try that. Or at least try it as a comparison. So, okay, so there we go. If I paste this in place, I'm on iMac Pro, it's 10 core, so it's been holding up really great. So what I might do instead, if I am having problem with very tricky, very like complex line work and the drape tool's not working, I might come over here and say intersect faces with model, or you could say with context, or you could say, in this case, with selection, because you want to be careful, because if you have hidden objects, it'll intersect your mesh with things that are hidden, and that'll be kind of not what you want to do. So what I would want to do is usually say, to be safe, select your mesh and select your object that you want to drape or you want to intersect, and say intersect with selection. What you're going to do is not only is it's going to speed up, process should be pretty quick, and then it should be safe that it's not going to conflict with other things that may be hidden, like if you have CAD line work or something that's been on a hidden layer or turned off. I think this mesh, I think the sandbox, I'm going to blame Sandbox from Contours on this one, because I think it added, I think the tin is just a little bit, or either that or it's OBS. I can blame OBS. When you live stream stuff, sometimes you're just using too much processing power for these kinds of tasks. So this is why you don't do this live. That's why most people don't do this live. So there you go. I mean, ultimately that was my long way of saying is that the next step in the process is to use a combination of drape or extrude and intersect with model, to do it in pieces, and to do it so that in just the pieces that you need, so that you can drop this onto the mesh. Now, I'm going to put an asterisk here, because there may be a reason. I'm going to undo that. There may be a reason why you don't need to do that, because if we're doing a master plan and we're doing a concept, it may be better actually to keep your mesh just clean and just use it for a reference. And I'll show you why at the end. If we get to it, I want to show you why it may be better not to do that step. The reason why we did it here in this one, and let me go ahead and turn in my tags. I'm going to go back to working, and I'm going to get rid of, I'm just going to hide that let's see, I'm going to hide this, which one was this? That one? Yeah, I'll hide that for right now. The reason why we did it on this one is because we knew we were going to render. So when you go to send this to, when we go to pick a view and you go to render it, you actually need the ground plane to be something that you can assign render materials to. So it was an awful lot of work to drape onto the ground plane that we maybe didn't need to do if we were only going to Photoshop. So again, think about what you need first. You could save yourself a day's worth of work. So I'm going to move on. I'm just going to go through, because I'm at my third of my time mark, and I want to go to layout, but I just want to go through the other tags that I haven't talked about. And I want to kind of talk about why they're set up that way and how they help with management. So unless there's anything else, any other comments or questions coming in, Donovan, that's what I want to go. And then we're going to go and we're going to pause and we're going to go to layout.
We did have one coming in, somebody asking, now and again, I import STL files into SketchUp, and I've always wondered what's the biggest STL file that you can import into SketchUp. I usually just import small STL files.
I would say STL comes more from like if you're getting something on Sketchfab, or like if you're going, if you know you're going to 3D print. So I would say you're right, Donovan. My experience has been that they're smaller files. So I don't have an answer for that. I don't, because it comes in as DWG. Or if you're bringing in something from another site, it's probably going to be OBJ, and then you need an importer like Transmuter or Universal Importer. I don't know. That's a great question for the group. All right, well, let's see here. So we've got all my CAD line work that I would have draped. I'm going to turn that off for right now. So that's off. I've draped that. So once you draped it or intersected, depending on how you want to do it, I actually have now a ground plane that I can go in and assign color to. You don't have to assign the color to, but one thing that's nice is when you have color to areas, you can select all by the same material. And then you can apply that to a tag if you wanted to, or if I knew I'm going to send this to a renderer, this is really helpful because they could replace the material like in V-Ray all at once. They could just say replace material. So having the materials on the ground plane is an extra step, but it's going to make not only for easier coordination when we're spinning around the model in real time, but it's also going to make the life of a renderer a little bit easier. The nice thing about being a renderer and being a master and doing master planning is you can give them hopefully, maybe not exactly, but hopefully what they need without being, in a perfect world, you give them what they need without them asking for it. You say, here you go, this will work for you. Yeah, let's look at some organization, and then I want to do scene and style setup, because that's important. It's important that we do that here in SketchUp before we go to layout. So I've got my ground plane. It was kind of a pain in the butt. I'm going to switch to perspective mode for this because I know some of you don't like that I work with a field of view of 1. So let's just say 35. Okay. So we've got our ground plane. I kept my property line intentionally floating above the surface because it doesn't line up exactly with the mesh, and that's okay because that's really just going to get exported separately. It's going to be a layer that can, or tag can be turned on and off. But now we're going to look at a few different things. The first thing is, when I was working on the ground plane, I looked at it a few different ways. Is that I could turn the ground plane all on or all off. Or what I did is I also thought about breaking them up into pieces. I actually broke the ground plane up into pieces because the reason why is because if I only wanted to work on this part and I was adding furnishings and stuff like that, I would just work on the east end of the site. So that, because that way I'm only kind of, not just because of model getting bigger in performance, but also because it just allows me to focus more when I don't have hundreds of buildings and hundreds and thousands of trees. It just allows me to kind of focus. So the next thing you can see, I did the same thing. So I could turn the blocks either all on or all off, or I could turn them off individually and work with them individually. And the other thing about this is you can make this a component. So if I make this a component, I can call this block center, and then I could save this out. I could say save as, and I could give this center block to somebody else and say, okay, you're working on the community center. Here's the base for it. And then I don't have to give them the full master model because they don't need it. They're only working on the community center. When the community center is this area that has sort of the steps, the amphitheater, and the sports, the soccer field, and it's got sort of the plazas and things like that. That only happens here. And the other thing is there's this big water retention, water feature, and so it's like we could work on just the grading of that individually. I know this is messy here. It looks messy because remember it's master planning. So I'm going to say that like 100 times. It's master planning, fast and loose. Yeah. So I've got my CBT, so I can switch at any time to CBT. I like CBT because and I'm going to get rid of, can I get rid of, is that the one I want to get rid of? I want to get rid of that extra mesh that I added because I added that after I set up all this. Hopefully I got rid of the right one. So while that's going, CBT helps me stay organized. You'll notice that like any of the streams, especially when you go to render, I'll use CBT, which is color by tag. So the color by tag mode is basically really quick to show me everything, but not just everything at once. It just reminds me that if something came in accidentally and it's either untagged or it's on the wrong tag, like I could just come over here to untagged and I'll assign that something like black, a color that doesn't show up anywhere else. And then if anything is black, like for example, if this sports court accidentally for whatever reason was added after the fact, it would be black and it would warn me, hey, you need to move this. So I'm going to go a little quicker here because I think everyone kind of gets good model organization, good habits. I want to spend a minute on trees, and because there's a rationale for that. So if I go to working, I don't want my scene should not have working saved as a camera location. And the reason why is because if I'm over here and I want to switch to CBT, I should be able to switch back to working without losing that camera position. So I like to uncheck camera because if I'm working over here and then I want to go CBT and then I want to go to working and then I'm over here and CBT and working, I like to be able to switch back and forth between the two. So back to working here. If I turn on my buildings, I have buildings. I did the same thing. So I turned, these buildings some of them came from SketchUp, some came from Rhino. And I'm going to change my field of view again back to 35 for those that, camera, field of view. Is this my field of view? That's field of view. There's an icon now for that, for those that didn't know that. 2023 has an icon for field of view. You can see when all the buildings are on, especially buildings that come from Rhino, this is where it starts to get a little bit heavy because it's in the building geometry. And the buildings are as sort of as simple as they can be. There's just a lot of them. That's all.
You know, it's just a lot of detail. Like when you get in here and you look at like the glass has a thickness, and you get it has mullions and things like that. And it's sort of like if you can model in master planning level, if we can not have that kind of detail, that would be awesome. But if so, that's okay. We'll work with it. So I'll go and do the same thing. You'll notice that I have buildings set for the west side. So I can turn the west side buildings off, I can turn the center buildings off, and I can turn the east buildings off. So that's basically that. The last thing I want to do is, before we go, because we're at our time, I want to go to layout now, is I want to talk about trees. So you've seen buildings, you've seen the ground plane, you've seen the contours, you've basically seen everything except furnishings. And furnishings are, I'll tell you right now, they only were added where we knew we were going to render from. So if I turn my P line off, we knew that we were going to render. This was a really significant urban paseo, so that we knew we were going to catch either a ground level or an aerial or both from this corner. It was a significant corner to show as sort of the design story. So there was a lot more work in key areas, but we didn't spend the time to furnish the whole thing, because if it doesn't show up in the rendering, don't do it. So I'll turn those off, but I do want to share with you the trees. So if I turn my trees on, yeah.
Brad in the comments is asking, do you still have the ability to turn on and off all individual tags in the folder one at a time?
You can turn them all. I'm not using tag folders because I built this before tag folders was a thing. So there's no tag folders in this one. But if I was smart, I would not create a blocks all tag. I would just have my center, east, west blocks, and I would put them in a folder, and I would call them blocks. So in theory, I mean, we could do that right now if somebody wants to see that. I would just take these three, and I would create a new folder, and I'd just call them blocks. And then I would toggle blocks on and off, right? So I have them individually, and then I have them in a folder. So a folder would be a smart way to do it. But this was 6 years ago, so I didn't have a folder then. Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks. Did that answer it? I hope that answered it. I want to talk about trees really quick, because I have them. You'll see that I have them two ways. And for those that have seen any of my videos, the skill builders, you'll know that I like to embed a 2D component into my 3D trees. I kind of wish this happened automatically, like somehow it just knew to do this. You could just press a button and say generate 2D symbols, but it doesn't. You just have to draw a circle and put it on a 2D tag and put it inside of the 3D component. And the reason why I do that is actually I have them on, whoops, I actually need to get out of the group. You can't turn a group off when you're inside of it. But the reason why I did that is the trees were really important to have different kinds of trees, because the trees told the story of what the roads were. So different trees were designed differently. But if I could turn off the 3D, and I could be left with just the 2D symbol, which is nice, because when you're looking down in master planning, when you're looking down at something, especially when you're like space planning and you're like arraying these trees and you want to do an array or something, it's kind of nice to be able to actually just work with the 2D symbol like you would in CAD. But then when you want to see what that looks like, you could get down on the ground and you could turn the 2D off and the 3D on. So because those symbols are linked, you're always 3D, 2D. And the nice thing about that was this was done really intentionally. And I'm going to show you, if that's okay, I'm going to divert just for a moment. I'm going to divert just for a second to talk about the trees for a second. Because
divert all you want. I'm right here with you.
Yeah, I know. It's my stream. It's like it's my party. I can cry if I want to. It's my stream. I can go on a tangent if I want to. No. It's not my stream.
Patrick,
it's ours.
Yep. Patrick chimed in and said, love the workflow where you create components and pass it out to a colleague to work on and then reference it back in.
Yep. And you just reload it.
And then you've had a couple of the people just saying great techniques.
Okay, good. Thank you. Feedback helps, because if everyone's like done this before, seen it, old news, let me know. We'll move on to something else. The trees were really important because the trees told a design story. It told certain trees were used. You can see they were existing trees to be preserved.
There were accent trees that were in courtyards and plazas. So that was important to indicate gathering spaces. And there were 2 street trees, one being a central spine, so that read graphically as more prominent, and then the other one was just a generic street tree. And the reason why I like to use more than one tree, usually 3 minimum, is because because the trees are not just these like background elements. They're not set dressing. They are as important as the buildings. They are as important as the parcels. A tree is a design element. It's like if you're going to think about where light poles go, you need to think about where trees go. If you're going to think about what building materials like brick you're using, you need to think about the tree color, canopy, fall color, bloom color. So they're the trees by themselves. So you can see what they look like, and I can show you the model. But as you can see, I did this because I did some screenshots after the process was done to sort of explain the process back to the team. And you can see there's the embedded components so that you have them both in 3D and 2D. And the reason why I'm bringing this up and I'm taking this tangent is because remember, we were going to render. So everything that I was building in 3D is going to an illustrative plan, which is where we're going today, shortly. But it was also going to render. And it had to be for an aerial, and it had to work for ground level views. And so each of these trees were keyed to a photorealistic tree and a tree species that actually grows in Vancouver, or at least close enough that it works for what they would expect in this area. So that was kind of fun. And then the last thing is, I'll show you in just a second. Actually, I'll show you when we get to layout. Yeah, that's it. So that's trees. Trees are fun. You can use path copy to do, if you want to run them along a path. Like in this case, you can see that if there's like the central spine and it kind of curves, you can use path copy because it's on a curve. So that's better than a linear array, in which case you're locked to just straight lines. The other thing you could do is if you had trees in CAD, if somebody did lay them out in CAD, you could just do a block swap. So bring them in as blocks and then just place your tree component inside the CAD block and delete the CAD block. And then every CAD block will replace with a SketchUp component. So different ways to do the trees, but either way, it looks like a lot, but it's really not too bad. These this clump of existing trees here that I wanted to kind of keep, those were done as, let me switch to 2D. Those were done using scatter, which I to be honest with you, was a little denser than it needs to be, but that's the way it feels when you're there in Vancouver. It's just thick forest, right? So this is kind of meant to represent this area that should be left untouched. So yeah, that's that. Let's go. We're almost at the top of the hour, so let's go to layout because we got to get to layout and to Photoshop. So that was great. Thank you everyone who's still with me on this. What do we need to do to get to layout? We need to do a couple things. We need to think about styles, and we don't really need to think about scenes so much unless we really need certain things to show, in which case we could do them here in SketchUp. But layout is so great now. The latest version, and I say latest because back then when I did this, that version I don't think had tag and style overrides. So you had to have everything set up in a scene for everything that you needed. And now in layout, it's like all I have to do is set up one scene, if that. I don't even need to set up. If I know I'm going to do a top down, I don't even need to set up a scene. But I did set up a scene. I did set up a plan view because as I'm working in the file, I want to make sure that I can look at, okay, generally, what does everything look like when it's turned on? So if I go CBT, you can see everything looks good. Everything's organized. And if I go plan view, one thing I'm missing is my existing buildings. I'm going to turn those on. I don't know why I lost those. And I'm going to update this. Probably will save this. I don't think I should probably save it. I haven't done anything to it. I've just been turning things on and off. Save. Matt, this is where Matt would come in with the sound effects. Save.
When in doubt, say, I know. I'm not as well prepared with the sound effect library as Matt is whenever he comes and does the lives.
Don't worry about it. Okay, so from here, here's pretty straightforward. I've got a plan view, so I'm just going to double check to make sure I'm in parallel projection, which I am. That's great. I don't need to worry about my tags because we're going to override them in layout. So I don't really care. As long as everything is tagged properly, then I'm fine. The one thing I do need to look at is styles. So for those that haven't done this process, pay attention. Class, sorry, that's the teacher in me. Class, this is important. Because you can't create styles in layout. You can just overwrite them. So you need the styles set in SketchUp. And the styles I want to share with you really quickly are, number one is a CBT. And the CBT does two things, is that it's an organizational tool as I'm working. But when I go to export to Photoshop, if I wanted to use select everything that's in yellow, or let's say the existing buildings, and I want to fade them, I could select by color in Photoshop. I select by color range. So I select everything that's orange. And then now I could just mask out. I could create a layer mask. So I'm already pre-thinking in Photoshop, which is why these colors are different from each other. If they were all blues and all greens, it wouldn't work. So I have a CBT, and I also have the edges turned off. So if I could turn the edges on, but it wouldn't work as well, because when you do select by color range, you're going to lose that edge thickness. You'll lose it in the selection in Photoshop. And then you'd have to go back and modify the selection. So in this case, I don't want that. The next one I have here.
I think you need to remind people real quick what CBT stands for. There's, whenever you say it, people are thinking cognitive behavioral therapy. And
that's true. I also think of CBD too, but we're not going on that kind of trip today. We're just a CBT.
Yep, people made that exact comment too. That's
what it sounds like in my head when I say it. CBT is my short for color by tag. So when you click color by tag, again, you can turn it on and off in the tags panel, but in order to save it to a style, you actually need to create a style. You can see here I'm adding it. I come over here and I would turn my CBT color by tag on, and I would add a new style, and I would name it CBT. So basically, you don't get that as a style unless you create it as a style. If I say it again, I'll try to say color by tag, but it's just color by tag. It just takes me a while. So CBT, color by tag.
That's all right.
Okay. The next one I'll do one where I turn the edges off. And the reason why is because I like to separate edges. Oh, this reminds me, I'm missing a style. So this is great. We'll set one up. I like to separate colors from edges. And the reason why is because in Photoshop, I like the color fills, but I also like, in this case, hang on, let me double check. This should not be solid colors. This should be textured colors. Although you could do it as solid colors. I'm going to do it as textured colors, and we're going to see what happens. So in this case, I've got no edges. I've got one with no edges on at all, just the color textures. And then I've got another one here with no edges, no colors. This is hidden line style. So if I turn my edges on, you'll see this is, they're there. They're just, they're not showing. And why do I want one that's all blank white and it's not there, nothing's there? And the reason why is because when I go to turn my shadows on, which I'm not doing, you'll notice I don't work with my shadows on because it just adds time. It adds time to the process that I don't need. You'll see spinning beach ball. It's a lot of information. So I want my shadows on, but I only want the shadows, because when I get into Photoshop, I'm going to change the color of them from gray to something a little bit more emotional. Something a little bit more poppy. So that's why I have a color that has hidden line with no edges, with no lines. It's for shadows. And I don't need to save this. Again, I don't need to save this to a scene, because when I get into layout in just a second, I'm going to turn that on. Speaking of getting to layout, I want to get there. So let me make sure that I have one more. If I go to styles, the one that I forgot to do. Oh, I have one with everything on. The everything on is just kind of like, I just like to have one with I like to have an export with everything. And that way I don't have to, I have one that just shows it all like merged. It's just good to have one. Oh, actually I need that because that's my working style. It's my working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to this one. And because I forgot to do this earlier, I'm going to turn edges on and profiles on. And I'm going to create a new one. And this one is going to be called edges, or edges only, or edges black and white. And that's it. Save it. Now we're going to go to layout. So now we have everything. We've built the plan. We've arranged the trees. We imported the buildings from Rhino or from SketchUp. Remember, there were 3 people. It's funny. There was me doing the whole master plan and the viz coordination and the open space design, but there was 4. I think there were 3 architects. So they were lucky, and maybe the buildings just need that much more time and detail. But they were 3 people working on the buildings that were feeding buildings in as they were being developed. So I'm complaining because I feel like that's not fair. I want 2 people on the open space team. Okay, ready? Let's go. We're going to send this to layout. Send to layout. It's going to ask me what size I want. I have no idea because I really don't even remember how big it was. You have to think about, it helps to think ahead. Let's just do this arc D. Let's see, that's 24 by 36 inches. It's a typical board size. Let's do that, but the arc D is not an option. So I'm just going to click tabloid landscape. And then it'll think for a second.
Is that for the final draft paper? Like why those dimensions?
Well, that's a great question. Because in the old world, when I say old world, the way we used to do things is we used to print stuff. And so we'd always want to make sure that we're working to a scale that fits a printable sheet. So architecture E1 is 30 by 42 and architecture D for imperial units is 24 by 36. If you're doing, for my metric friends out there, I think it would be, let me see if I can remember the AO. AO would probably be, there's A1 and AO, if you know what that means in millimeters. I'm not going to try to remember what that means. Okay, so what that means, well, basically is it's nice to work to a board size, and then that way, if you ever needed to print it, you would have that ability. So that's just how I would think about this. So paper size, in this case, I would just change it. I'm going to go for this so we can go kind of fast. I'm going to go 36 wide by 24 high, and that's going to be the scale that I want to work at. It's not DPI, that's just this paper size. And then maybe margins, although I don't think I'm going to need them. I'm pretty sure I'll stay within them, but I'll go ahead and turn those on. Now, don't forget my display resolution is different from my output resolution. Right, folks? So anyone who says, oh, layout, is rasterizes, it rasterizes, it pixelates and stuff. Well, yes, maybe, but mostly it's because it's displaying at a lower resolution so that things can stay optimized. So I just want to point that out, that you have that ability to control. You can differentiate between what you see in layout to keep things moving quickly to what you see in the export. So that can be done here, or that can be done when you go to export. When you say file export, you can change the setting there. So that's going to change my paper size. You can see here, and Donovan, again, for you, you're the voice of the audience. If there's anything that is sort of brand new to you or stands out, please let me know, and I will make sure to give that extra attention. Right now, we need to give this a scale. So what I want to do is, I have actually no idea. Let's just say here, let's just move this. Let's just open up my viewport for a moment. And we're doing this on the fly because, again, I have no idea what scale I worked at originally. Let's look at, if we're going to stay in imperial, which, sorry for my metric friends, let's try it's master planning scale. So let's try 1 inch equals 100 and see what that does. Okay, it's a little too big. So let's go a little bit smaller. And we may have to create a custom scale for this. And that's okay. That's okay. Let's try 1 inch equals 60. That might be too small. We might need 1 inch equals 80, which is not a real scale. Oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. When I first learned scale, when I was an intern, and they tried to teach me how to do scale plot sheets in CAD, I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. I was like, I could not figure it out. She took 2 pieces of paper and she's like, okay, so this is 1 to 12. So this is what it is in the real world. And the sheet of paper represents by scaling it by a factor of 12. And I was like, lady, you're speaking a foreign language. Scale is tricky. So that doesn't work either. So what I'm going to do is double check to see if I have 1 inch equals 150. And if not, I'm going to create a custom scale. Oh, I do have 1 inch equals 150. So if that might be a weird scale. So I would say I would point that out for somebody, if that's a problem, maybe change the sheet size. But in this case, I'm actually going to run with it. I think 1 inch equals 150 is perfect. That fits everything nicely. I'm going to change my viewport. I'm going to just kind of crop it in. You can see everything fits. That's why I have everything fits. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually change the paper size a little bit. I can make it smaller, and knowing in Photoshop that I'm going to be architecture D, or knowing that in InDesign I might be architecture D. So if I really wanted to kind of save myself some time and trouble, I could come over here and know that, okay, this fits Arc D, but I really don't need that height. So I'm going to bring this back down to 18 inches and see what happens there. and say, you know what, I'm just going to tighten that up a little bit. I'm just going to tighten that white space up just a little bit. All right, so for sake of time, let's now I got to break this up. That's it. That's good. Sending it to layout. Now it's to scale. Okay, so in a perfect world, we could just plot this out as is and call it done, and that's fine. And a lot of times that might be enough. But as you saw with the introduction when we did our little intro, where was that? Let me pull that up, because the whole point was to kind of show why are we doing all of this, folks? Why are we making our lives more difficult than they need to be? Well, first of all, it's kind of fun, but second of all, it's because we want to get to kind of this level of detail here. We want sort of the softer shadows. We want sort of, textures. We want sort of the line work. We want to be able to control the opacity of the line work so we can pop things or hide things or mask things. And I think then this isn't the best for anyone who's, who does master plans. It's like, this isn't the best master plan, but it's pretty good. It did the job. It had, a kind of the right balance between sort of some water textures and some plazas and some different kinds of vegetations, cars for scale. So green roofs, some of the sustainability initiatives. So it kind of did a nice job. From here, this is where it gets fun. It's been fun. I'm going to create a page. I've opened up my page setting here, and I'm going to create one called all. And then I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to come over to tags. So what I want to do is figure out, so this is basically all I'm going to do from this point is I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to tag override, style override, and I'm going to assign it to a page because these pages are going to be my exports. And sorry, my head is blocking. So let me, maybe I'll move my pages up to here just for now. And I'm not going to use scale drawing. I'm not going to use dim style. I may use layers, but I don't think so. So let's just kind of go with that. So I mean, have you used layout for like some of your home projects, your crafting projects and woodworking stuff, or no?
Yeah, all the woodworking projects. Because one of the things that I've used layout for in the past is helping me to come up with plans, so that things that I build that people want to build as well, use layout to get the angles and the whatnot right, so that I can share plans with people to show them how to make what I make. That's cool.
And getting it to scale is kind of important, isn't it? Because if you're going to put a dimension on something, otherwise you have to like kind of just guess or know in your head what it should be.
Yes or no. Yep.
I'd rather not do either. I'd rather let the model tell me. Yeah, so I love layout, by the way. If you didn't already know this, is that even if you only used, because this is how I started using layout, because I don't do construction details or anything like that anymore. But like when I first started using layout, it was literally just to export pieces of plans to scale, so that then you could render them in Photoshop. So even if you only use layout for this, it's so valuable. Okay, so for here, I'm going to come in and I'm going to open up my styles panel, and I have to decide what I want my first group to be. It doesn't matter. I'm going to do ground plane first. So I'm going to do ground color. And I'm not going to maybe do all of these, but I'll do some of these. So I want to turn everything above the ground plane off. So I want to turn the P line off. I want to turn the furnishings off. I want to make sure my contours are off, and my blocks I don't want to turn off because that's my ground plane when I say ground plane. And I want to make sure that my buildings all are turned off. And I want to make sure that I'm using the color no edge style. So there it is. My color no edge style. It's displaying at a lower resolution. That's okay. Don't worry about it. When we export, it'll be fine. Or if we wanted to, we could switch it to vector. I'm not going to do that right now. So that's it. So that's ground color. So let me see. I don't think there's anything else I need. I'm going to create a new one. I'm just going to duplicate this one. And just because this one's easy, and I probably should have started with this one, is I'm going to come over here. Make sure you select your viewport, because you can't override stuff until your viewport. I want to turn the the P line on, and I'm going to turn all the blocks off. And I want to turn, let's see, the existing buildings off. So now I have one for just the polyline boundary. And I may or may not use this line. This line may just be for reference in case something shifts. So now I've got a polyline. So now let's duplicate that again. And let's do buildings color. Let's just do buildings solid color. So that's color, no lines. So the buildings color, I would select this here, and you can see what I'm doing is I'm just repeating the process. So for those that I want to turn my buildings on, this one's the heaviest. This is the heaviest information on everything. So I've got the buildings color. And I want to see if there's anything. Do I need anything with the buildings? No. I have the existing and I have the proposed on the same sheet. If I was worried about it, I can separate them, or I can use the color by tag mode. Like if I wanted to mask or clip or fade the existing buildings, they're already faded here. But if I wanted to, that color by tag is going to make that really easy. So I've got buildings color. I'm going to come over here. Speaking of color by tag, I'm just going to go color by tag, CBT. And I'm going to come over here and say, let's turn color by tag. So I could do this with just buildings if I wanted to, or I could do this with everything. So I'm going to turn on, I'm going to do this everything except my trees. And again, you can do this as, you can go paths and you can do this as sidewalks. However deep your organization goes, the more value you're going to get out of the color by tag. So in this case,
so we have
ask me questions,
comment
please.
From Randy.
Okay.
He said, as an aside, the Jericho Lands project is still a large project here in Vancouver, and a final report to the city is due this fall.
Yes, this was a competition that it, for whatever reason, it went our way and then didn't go our way at that time, and then it became something else. So it's still a thing and it's still a project, but it's very different from this. So this project, as you see now, isn't the one that, if that one gets built, is not going to see what you see built at the end of the day. So that was a good reminder that these master plans, again, your plans, Daniel Burnham likes to say, he says, make no little plans. And this wasn't a little plan, but maybe it was too small, because if you look at the latest plan, they've got they're all skyscrapers. Just everything's just tower, 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 tower. And I guess the thought at the time, 6 years ago, was that there was a little bit more sensitivity to the existing context and this idea of building the massing up as you move down the slope. I don't know, felt like it was a good idea. Let's see, what else is there? Yes, keep the questions and comments coming as I go, because I'm just repeating this step here. I want to do building outlines, building edges. Sometimes I say lines, sometimes I say edges. There's really no rhyme or reason why I call them edges or why I call them lines. I'm going to I want just the building edges. Okay. Now I want just the ground plane edges. Now you could do this all in SketchUp if you wanted to. If you wanted to do all this in SketchUp and then save each one to a scene, then in layout, you just come in here and you just pick that scene for each one. There's no reason why you can't do that if you prefer to do it that way. So ground edges, basically I would come in here and I would turn off my buildings all, and I would turn on my blocks, and I would turn off buildings existing. I separated out buildings proposed from existing. So this is all my ground plane. So stairs, plazas, retaining walls, parcel paths, sidewalks, crosswalks, all the ground plane information is now separate. What else do I need? Shadows and trees. So let's do shadows first. We're going to do building shadows. So I'm going to pop over to my building color, or I could pop over to, if I wanted to, I could pop over to my building lines. That's probably, doesn't matter which one, because we're just going to change it anyway. So you'll notice how fast things are going. So I'm working in raster right now. So if I did want vector edges, I would change it at the end before I export. So you'll notice that there's no delay. When some people do say that layout, and maybe everyone's projects are different, so I can't speak about everyone's projects, but they'll say, oh, layout slows down when you get too much information. But you saw how big this master plan is. We went through it. It's 8 million polygons. It's 100 acres. It's a lot of information, and you'll notice that layout so far has not had any problems. I just want to point that out for some people who do think or have heard in the forums that layout can't handle complex projects. I think it's just a lot of it comes down to me personally, organization. So let me go to, and I know every project is different, so I know that there's a little asterisk on that statement. Let me go, I said I was going to do shadows. So what I want to do is switch to my shadow style, which basically turns everything off. And I want to turn shadows on. So I have to remember, where do I turn shadows on? Because I actually don't. It's under effects, shadows on. It should remember my time of day, my time of year. You can overwrite it here if you wanted to, but I'm happy with what I had in SketchUp, so I'm going to leave it. And then I just double check my viewport, my clipping, because shadows, unlike the geometry, my viewport might show my building geometry, but the shadow of a tower might extend beyond. So same with my contours, I might need to extend my boundary a little bit. So in this case, my shadows look good. So I'm going to pop back over here to my pages. And I've got my building. Oh crap. I need to add a new one. I did that. I didn't add a new page first. I was supposed to duplicate first. So what I need to do is go back to my building lines, and I need to turn shadows off, and I need to turn my edges back on. Now the cool thing about this is, unlike in SketchUp, you need to press update. When you make changes to styles, you have to press update. Excuse me, that's edge only. So what's cool about this is that you don't actually, all you have to do is make the change, and you don't have to also say update. Like when you make a change in SketchUp to a style, you have to say update, or to a scene. Here you don't have to do that, it just remembers. So this is building shadows. I hope this is interesting for everyone at home. I love this kind of stuff, so I could do this all day. I used to do this all day. So thank you for letting me do this with you, because I don't do this.
It is fascinating to watch you do this
very often.
It is well beyond the realm of my experience, and so it's always amazing to see like the possibilities of the things that you could do in SketchUp and layout.
Well, you can tell. I mean, you can tell I've done this more than once, right? And I don't just mean for this stream. I mean, you can see that this is a process that's taken a few years to figure out, because if you were just starting out, if someone said, this is what I want you to manage a complex model. I want you to render 9 views. I need an illustrative site plan that reads at several layers of detail. And I need you to also coordinate the open space design. And I need you to, and you have 5 days to do it. I mean, there's no way you could do it if you hadn't already done it 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times. That's just, you just say, I have no idea. And that's not an insult or anything. It's just, I would say, I have no idea how to. So the nice thing about this is that it's like, yes, I've done this a few times, and so I have. And again, this isn't a perfect system because it's always evolving. It's just, this is what served me at the time. And I do think that a lot of it is still relevant to today. So I need to do contours. I mentioned contours. Now I may or may not show those in the final, but I do always like, if I made the effort to put it in 3D, I want to make sure that it gets to the 2D, even if I decide at the end of the day that I fade it way back, or I decide I don't want it at all. I do like to have it because I've already made the effort to show my contours. So contours, and then I want those as edges. So I'm going to come over here and turn contours on, and I would turn buildings all off. Yeah. Are we missing anything, Donovan? You've been with me this whole time. Let me see here. We've got let's go through these really quick. I have everything, just in case, just as a reference. I have, trees. Okay, I just answered my own question. I said I was going to do trees and I didn't. Let's create a new one.
Randy from the comments says, I do this all day and I don't even get paid for it.
Would do this, or you do this? You do this. That's for free.
I do this.
Good for you. Yeah, it's a lot. I wish I had the discipline to sit, and I gave myself a challenge during the pandemic where I was going to do a rendering a night. I just gave myself 2 hours to do a rendering every single night, and I was like, I'm going to do this all through the pandemic. I lasted 5 nights, by the way. If no one's paying me to do anything, or no one's saying I need this as a favor, as a personal favor, I'm probably not going to do it, by the way.
Yep. Randy said, I consider it drawing and sketching just like an artist paints.
I do sketch. Yes, I do sketch on my own as a just go and draw, go sit out at a coffee shop and draw and do that. But other than that getting behind the computer, because we're behind the computer all day. So it's like, I need to do something that's not this. And that's the hardest part, because I do enjoy it and it is fun. So buildings all, I turned my buildings all off, but I'm still, okay, I'm sorry, there was just a delay. So these are my trees, and I want to turn my buildings.
So there's a comment from Zay that says you can create scenes in SketchUp with the same styles, add an ambient occlusion rendering from V-Ray, and there you have it.
Oh, yeah, to get like softer shadows and edges and things like that. Yeah, I've done that. I'm not doing that here for today. I didn't do it for this project, but I have in Some of my in the past, I've done a top view at parallel projection and rendered a clay model so that the shadows so that the topography and shadows has that softness to it, and the ambient occlusion again, so that when the buildings hit the ground, you get sort of that darker shadow. Otherwise, in Photoshop here, we'll see if we have time. There's a way to do that using dodge and burn, but totally, yeah, if you can do that in V-Ray, go for it. I don't render the plans in V-Ray because I think that it's V-Ray's photorealism, to be honest with you. I've seen plans where someone goes into Lumion or Enscape and they just take the top-down view of the model and they just render that and they call that their site plan. And I don't, I'm being particular here by saying that I don't like that, and not because it's lazy, because you're just doing a top-down render of your model, but because a site plan actually is almost like it's a weird hybrid between a diagram and something that's a little bit more realistic. And I think that's where that measure of sort of creative control, if you just do a top-down Enscape view and just go and kick it off, I feel like you're sort of removing that process where you're actually stripping information out in some areas and you're bringing more information in other areas. And otherwise it just reads as like all sort of the same. So I'm not saying that doesn't work for everybody or you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying that for me particular, I don't just render a top down, because that could save us a lot of time. I have my trees, and this is where I want to point out something really quick. The trees look good. I'm going to duplicate the trees really quick, and I'm going to call this tree shadows. Now we don't need to do the tree shadows, and I'll tell you why. In Photoshop, they've got this great filter called drop shadow, which I think is probably the first thing anyone learns in Photoshop when they're learning special effects, especially in landscape architecture. You learn the drop shadow tool. And we could just do the drop shadow on these and call it done. But hang on, before I forget, I want the tree edges. So I want the tree edges and I want the tree color. So tree edges, and this first one would be tree color. So you can see I've got ground color, ground edges, building color, building edges. You see how I just call them lines and edges. So building shadows, contours, contour edges, tree color, tree edges. I haven't changed the tree edges, so let me do that before I forget. I'm talking and then I have to work too at the same time. Edges only. I want those because I want to separate them, because I want that control. I want to maybe make them white. So I would invert it, or I may want to fade it back so that it's at like a 20% opacity. So this is why I want those edges separate. But what I was saying is we have an option here for the shadows, and this will be kind of fun. I'm going to go ahead and do tree shadows. I'm going to put that on my shadow so everything turns white. And then we're going to go to Photoshop because we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to export. This is my last one, and then we're going to export. But I want to explain that we have two choices. If I turn my shadows on under effects, we could do this, which is we get this sort of diagrammatic shadow. So they're just kind of circles, or circles with some edge delineation depending on, here, actually, you know what you need to do? I made a mistake. You need your ground plane turned on. You need your ground plane turned on if you're going to cast shadows onto it. So in this case, I also need to go back to my building shadows, and I need to turn my blocks tag on. And you're going to see, because otherwise these are being cast onto what SketchUp thinks is its ground. But we saw we're 124 feet above the ground in some places. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that your ground is turned on. So that was a good catch. So here's the tree shadows. If you want to just do them as simple circles, we could just go and just do the drop shadow. And that's probably easier than exporting another tag. Now I want to point out that we have them in 3D. I made the effort to put them in 3D so that we could see it as we're designing and so we can give it to the renderer. So I could come over here and turn 2D off. Okay, turn 2D off and 3D on. Wait for it. Okay, do you see the difference? So because I have the 3D symbols, they're going to cast a 3D shadow. And I say 3D, it's actually a face me tree. So I'm just using the word 3D, meaning that it's above the ground. It's not a flat symbol. It has elevation to it. So I'm using that sort of misleadingly. But do you see the sort of shadows are a little bit more realistic? Now, I don't know. That may be something that you want, or maybe something you don't. And typically I give myself the option because, to be honest with you, I think plans, and this is why, again, I wouldn't do this in V-Ray or something like that. I would, or I might not do it in the trees in V-Ray,
because I like the simplicity of the tree shadows. I just wanted to share with you those. I'm going to use the drop shadow technique. So I'm going to dump the tree shadows and I'm going to call that good. One thing I want to do is I have my ground edges. Okay, that's it. Polyline, CBT, contours, CBT, contours. Sorry, let me zoom out so you can see the whole thing. Polyline's important because that's the P line. When I say polyline, my PL, I mean my property line. Excuse me. I think we've got everything.
All these acronyms.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. You know what no one told me to do? Shame on you, audience. You didn't tell me to save my layout file.
Save.
Totally could have lost all of this. So I'm going to save this now before we export this. So I'm save it to my desktop into my working folder here. We're going to call this SketchUp 2 PS for Photoshop. And I'm going to save this. Let's export it. Let's do this. Let's go to Photoshop. We have half an hour. Let's go to Photoshop. Let's do this. It's easy. I'm going to export desktop in my working folder here, and I'm going to call this export, just so I know what this is. I'm going to double check my options. I have everything pushed to the highest. If I was concerned again about vector, if I really wanted clean edges and I knew I was going to zoom in, or if I knew I was going to go to Illustrator, I would pick not everything. I would selectively choose. I would selectively choose which of these pages I would re-render as vector. For the sake of this argument, and I did a video, if you really want to know the difference between the vector and I actually used this file, this master plan. There is a skill builder or level up SketchUp on our YouTube channel, and the difference between it's showing you how to print to scale from SketchUp and how to do it from layout, and we go through the differences between vector and raster exports. So watch that. All right.
Yep, that's actually a great segue to just kind of plug our YouTube channel, because not only do we do these lives every Friday, we have an enormous, and I'm not understating that, we have an enormous collection of training videos on all things SketchUp over on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SketchUp, or you can just search at SketchUp or just search for SketchUp. So if you're joining us from Facebook or LinkedIn, anywhere else, and you want to find more SketchUp training, we have a plethora of resources on our YouTube channel that you can go and find all kinds of stuff.
Yes, thank you, Donovan, for that. And definitely on that note, subscribe, because first of all, and I'll probably say this again when we wrap up, and I have a second because my spinning rainbow is back. I'm exporting all these pages, so it takes a second. Give a subscribe. I don't really subscribe to a lot, but SketchUp is one of the few that I subscribe to, and the reason why is because we just started 2 new series, which is called Level Up SketchUp. And those come out once a week. I won't tell you when, because you need to subscribe in order to know when those are launched. And Level Up SketchUp is what we focus on, SketchUp Desktop. So that is native tools, and that is everything you need to know about just working in SketchUp, which is what most of us do most of the time. And then our other series that we have started, and I say recently, a few months ago, is called Beyond Desktop. We have this huge ecosystem, SketchUp, and even beyond SketchUp, Trimble. Some of you have seen Trimble Connect, Trimble Visualizer, Trimble Drawing Beta that's launched now, which is working with CAD files. A lot of that, SketchUp for iPad, of course, is just exploding. That's where Beyond Desktop comes in. I like to render in V-Ray, so I can't. For me, it's like, where do I put my V-Ray stuff? We put it in Beyond Desktop. So we do both. We give SketchUp all the love and attention it deserves, and then we go and we celebrate and we explore and we go deep into all of the ecosystem stuff. So I'm going to stop there because my file is done exporting. So that was perfect. A little shameless plug there. We're going to go to Photoshop. Now you'll notice I didn't have Photoshop open during this because Photoshop uses a lot of RAM. So I just kept it closed. So it's going to ask me what do I want to do? I'm going to tell you I could import all of them at once. I want to double check. This is where we double check. Well, I said that we're not worried about DPI. We're just worried about page size. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, for this sake, we're going to go quick. I'm going to keep it at the 150, but normally I'd bump it up at this point if I know I want more detail, maybe to be safe. We could do something like 200, but I'm
just going to go 150 just to kind of keep things going, just keep going things smooth. I'm only going to import the first page. I'll show you why in just a second. A little pro tip coming. I haven't used that term. That's the first time I've used that term today. Learned that from Daniel Tall.
It's the first time for everything.
I don't like, to be honest with you, some people say pro tip, and I don't feel like it's a pro tip. So I feel like don't use that. Don't misuse that term. That's why I don't use it very often. Because my expectations are really high. Like if you say pro tip, and then it's just like, wait a minute, that's just basic common knowledge.
So while that's spinning, Randy made a comment, said, I did manage to model my new house and walk around it in VR. My architect and builder were impressed. It worked out some of the engineering issues they hadn't thought of, which is really cool. Not to go on shameless rants again, but SketchUp Go and SketchUp Pro includes SketchUp for iPad. So if you have an iPad, one of the great things about doing SketchUp on the iPad is that you can view your model to scale in augmented reality. So you can do like he did, make a model, walk around literally inside the model and see how your model will look before you even start building. It's a fantastic feature.
That's awesome. Yes, VR.
Somebody just
VR,
asked,
AR.
did Eric accidentally set the DPI to 1500?
So if you notice why it was taking a minute, I was like, why is this taking so long? This shouldn't take so long. But it gave you the opportunity to talk, Donovan, so maybe that's why I did that. Okay, so here's why I said that we may or may not want to do all of them, all the imports at once. First of all, it lets you work with just the ones you want. So this first one comes in as layer 1. It renames it. So this is going to be SketchUp, and I'm going to put this as all. So this one has a name now. Now, if I come over here to my little my PDF, and the reason why I moved it onto the screen so you can see it, I'm going to drag this, and I'm just going to drop it right in, and then it's going to ask me which one I want. In this case, it sounds like a waste of time to do it one at a time. Oh wait, does this work this way? Maybe it only works if I import them individually. So it may not work this way. So it may not remember my page name. So if I click this one, yep, it doesn't remember. Sorry, it brings it in as a smart object. So if you do it one by one, you can bring them in as smart objects. May or may not want to do that. The other thing is that if you export them as separate pages, so they all have their own names, then when you bring them in individually, it retains the page name and you don't have to rename it. But in this case, I was trying to be smart and it didn't work. So that happens. Rasterized layer, that was my pro tip. I'm walking that back. What I'm going to do is this case, I would just go SketchUp and I put SketchUp prefix on everything so that I know that when I'm in Photoshop, I'm differentiating like this came straight from SketchUp. So I'm not going to do all of these because I want to spend the last, 10, 15 minutes. I kind of want to go through the plan that's already been done. Because that way, but I do want to kind of maybe talk about why. Let's maybe do a couple of things together, like shadows, because I know for some of you that haven't done a plan like this in Photoshop, it's kind of fun to work through it. But ultimately, I don't know. I don't know where the interest level lies at watching me, sort of organize layers and stuff in Photoshop. Let's try this. Let's try holding Shift and see if I can get all of these at once. Because I did this as a PDF. Shift. Can I do all of them? Can I do hold Command? Nope. Hold Shift. Shift. No, is it not letting me? Why can't I just hold Shift and get all of them? I'm doing one at a time. There it is. We're doing it one at a time, folks. It's okay. It's like therapy. You just kind of go through the motions. Have your tea. What I'm worried about is what happened there is it shifted. If you guys noticed that. I'm going to do this. Scratch this. We're going to see. We're going to do something a little different. I'm going to leave the all in there because that was important because that's my base reference. And then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to open this with Acrobat. And I'm going to export these as individual JPEGs. So I'm just basically go over here and say File. I'm going to say save as instead of PDF because I don't want them to come out in smart objects. And instead of rasterizing each one individually, it's way easier to come in here and say export to image. And I could do JPEG or PNG. PNG is going to be a little higher res. So I'm going to go PNG and I'm going to create a little folder. And I'm just going to call this exports as PNG. Always name stuff, like especially when you're going fast, like in a workshop or something. If you don't name stuff, and you go back later and you're like, oh, layer one, copy, layer one, copy, master plan final, revised, master plan final, revised 2, master plan final, revised 2, ES, which are my initials. Don't do that.
We joke about that all the time, but it's a real thing.
We all do. Anyone who works in an office, who works collaboratively, I mean, I hope you're like cringing or shaking your head right now that that's exactly what your team does. We all say we're not going to do that, or we all say that we have a better way to do it, and then we all end up doing that. Like when things get really like rushed. So I mean, I don't really need to do this because ultimately, I'd rather almost just open up the final Photoshop and just kind of say, here's how we built it up. But it's using the same information. So what we need to do is, what we would do from here is we would just basically layer each thing, put it in piece, and then use what we need from the SketchUp model, and then hide or modify what we don't. Basically, this gets us to what I think of as like those exports that I just did by breaking them out. All it does is just give me control over each element. And then the big thing is the colors and textures. So changing the shadow color is a big one, but then also coming in and one thing that SketchUp looks, I like the way SketchUp looks. Some people, say, oh, it looks cartoony or whatever. But again, as a design drawing, like this looks pretty good. There are things we can do to it. One thing I like to do in Photoshop as well is use either the color by tag, or I use the line work or something and all to create selections. And then I use the gradient tool. So if you want, I can show you something like that really quick. We'll just add some gradient, special effects, or we can look at adding what looks like to be a drop shadow, like someone said on the chat, the ambient occlusion, sort of doing like basically making the buildings look like they're more grounded. I also have the ability to do selections with the shadows. There's some tricks there with using the select by color so that we can invert or we can change, override shadow colors. Some fun stuff. So where are my exports? Here now, if this worked the way that I wanted it to, this should be faster. I should be able to select all of these, hold, and then just drop them into place. And just go click, click. I don't have to say click for each one, but I will if you want me to.
That's all right. In absence of Matt's soundboard, we can add our own sound effects. So you're good.
Okay. Now, I don't know if this is something that I did in layout. If I pop over here, no, I turned the background off. One thing that you may or may not have to do, and this may have been my export, is like you'll notice that if I come over here and this is where I would rename stuff. So I would put my color by tag. So if I wanted to do, again, this is what I was mentioning where it's really quick, where I could come in here and go select by color range and grab all my proposed buildings. And now I can mask those out. So if I wanted to then come in and find what I think are my buildings, which should be these, right? So what I might do is come in and add a white layer over the top of those because I did that quick selection. And then from there, we can start applying some special effects like this. I might do an outer glow. Let's see here. I like to do an outer glow, and I like to do that as match my shadow color. So if I'm going to use sort of a purple, and that sort of gives this ambient occlusion effect, you'll see in just a second. I'm going to multiply it, so you'll see what that looks like in just a second. So maybe add a little bit of noise just to break down that sort of cleanness so much. Like here we can add some noise, and that's really quick to do that. That's okay. So now I'll multiply this so that now I'm seeing my buildings underneath. The buildings here, they may have a white layer behind them. So what I might want to do is come in and find my building edges. These are my building shadows. We're going to get to those in just a second. I might come over here and go my building edges. I multiply those. So I might invert those to white. You'll see in just a second. Or I might come in here and take that, delete that, delete that. This is where it gets kind of fun because I can just, for fun, I can just put in an adjustment layer. So we're doing some non-destructive editing and maybe pull the saturation out of the original. So the master plan that has everything in it is just there for reference, and I'm kind of rebuilding each piece. So if I wanted the ground plane here, in this case, I would have the ground plane where you can see right there already even if I wanted to change the hue or saturation of the ground plane a little bit, I can start to pop, if the buildings are something that's more important, you can see just that little effect, this, what I'm going to call an AO for ambient occlusion, that starts to pop the buildings a little bit. It may be too much, but it starts to dial it back. And then let's do the shadows for fun. So I'm just doing a couple of these, and then I'm going to stop here in just a second, and I'm going to show you the final project, and we'll be done. So in this case, now the shadows are kind of a challenge because you'll notice that they came in flat with a white background. It covers everything. So in this case, you actually need to use the select by, I don't say you need to, you don't have to do anything, but it's recommended that you kind of select just the shadows themselves. And this is where I might come in and grab that same kind of more of a purpley color. So I just use that shadow layer as a reference, and then I would come in and multiply that. And if I think that that's not poppy enough, I could play with the saturation, or I could play with the lightness. I could play with the hue a little bit. The nice thing about that is once I don't have to feel like, even though I picked a color, I don't have to feel like I'm set with that color if I want to play with that a little bit. And if you wanted to, again, we're starting to build these layers up really, really kind of quickly. If you wanted to lighten, I mentioned this, if you're not rendering your shadows, you can come in here with dodge and burn. So dodge, just so you know, dodge lightens, burn darkens. So look over here. It's easier probably to see it here, but you can see if I zoom in, if I just kind of run the lighter along the edges, so the further it gets away from the building, the more ambient light is going to come in, and it's going to soften or lighten those shadows. So what you may, if you have the time and you don't render it, you could come in like this and just sort of spend 10 minutes or something and just lighten those shadows. The same thing applies for if you wanted to do the opposite and you wanted to maybe bring your brush size down just a little bit and you wanted to burn the shadows as they get closer to the bottom. Now I've already kind of done that a little bit by using that outer glow. That's kind of cool, but this is just kind of a way to enhance that effect if you just wanted to kind of show some accent just a little bit. So I'll kind of leave it at that. But now that we have that shadow layer separate, we can do that. The trees, I'm going to go ahead and do the opposite in this case. I'm going to select on the trees. Probably should rename them as I go. I'm going to select the color range. And in this case, I want to make sure that I'm getting just the white. I want to be careful because my trees are kind of light. I may want to darken them before I do this. And there you go. Now I have my trees. Now the trees need to be moved so that they are under the building shadows. So these are building shadows. Now why? So now I've got all my trees. The nice thing about this too is if I move my trees in the master plan, let's say a whole street changes and all the trees have to be reconfigured, all I have to do is go back to that layout file, update the SketchUp model, and then export just I don't export everything, just the tree page. Bring the trees back in again. And then if I apply any layer effects here, like in this case, I might come in and just like, remember how I mentioned you don't really need the tree shadows because you could just do drop shadow. So we can just do a drop shadow, grab a purple color. And I need to make sure that my light direction in Photoshop is the same as the light direction. Oh, distance up, size 2. Boy, I haven't done this in a long time. This is fun.
Okay, 2 quick comments. One says, wow, your skill set for this is incredible. And another, please don't forget to save.
Oh, save the Photoshop? Yeah, I haven't. But that's okay, because we're just messing around. So the same thing here is, you can start applying a bunch of stuff. If I wanted to bring like a white line, a little white edge around the tree and make that opaque. If I wanted to, excuse me, come over here and do a color, not a color overlay, but a pattern overlay. And you can see I can use something that looks like a tree texture. And then I probably would, maybe set that to multiply and then change the scale, not the opacity, the scale. So we can have something that just looks a little bit more like a tree texture. I'm just messing around. I'm just messing around right now, but that's kind of that's the fun part. I have all these pieces now that I can play with. Now I made a mistake here. My trees are on top of my buildings. So I do want to bring my trees. I would want to bring my trees down below. Where are my buildings? This is buildings. And then I'm going to wrap up because otherwise, I say this every single time that I can just do this. I can just do this all day. Let's see here. I've got I've got edges, property lines, contours, CBT. If I wanted to select something, I could just come in. I could just come in here and do some quick selects on my roads. Oh, one way to do curbs, if you guys want to do curbs, is you just use a stroke. Just do on your roads, just do a stroke, and then do a drop shadow, and then, or if you're doing your roads, you can do an inner shadow, and that's like a curb shadow. So that's kind of cool. Where is
Brad? Well, I was about to say, Brad from the comments says, $1 zillion question. How do you know when to stop tweaking everything in Photoshop?
When you're out of time. That's always the answer. Was that satisfactory or no?
It's an answer.
It's an answer.
Yep.
It's an answer. The contours, you can invert the contours. So, or you can adjust the lightness from your contours so that they are white. I like to do the contours here as white. So if this area has not been regraded, it doesn't really work because, the contours are existing. So you may want to do this as a before and after. But if you did want to show sort of generally the sort of direction of the slope and saying that the concept is to not do significant grading, you could do that, ultimately, so brightness, contrast. Yeah. So this is in a live stream. The answer is, Randy, was that Randy's question? In a live stream, the answer is 5 minutes ago. And then when you're on your own, the answer is when you run out of time.
Yeah, that was Brad's question.
Oh,
Randy had a comment saying this is like taking a few guitar lessons to see how hard it is and then watching Eddie Van Halen.
This is, you know what? I'll be honest with you. Plans. After doing after doing it in 3D for so long, because I started in 2D and then went to 3D. After doing it in 3D for so long, there's something really nice about doing a plan because it's just top view. It's you don't have to worry about the depth. I mean, you think about depth a little bit, like stacking things and where shadows are cast and stuff. But there's something that's really just fun about plans. And speaking of plans. I planned to get through this on time today. That was my plan, to cover the entire process. And so to do that, I just want to show you the final plan and then say goodbye to everyone. Oh, a little tear. I hate the goodbyes. That's why I talk. That's why I keep going. Because I don't like to say goodbye. This is like my favorite time of the week, and I don't want to leave you. I don't want to leave you. Okay, so let's see here. But you know what? You know where to find me. Shoot me. Find me on the forum. Find me on or Donovan. Shoot us a comment on YouTube. We never really go away completely, do we? Do we, Donovan?
No, we don't. We don't.
This is sort of more, and I don't know if this is the finished one, but I'm just going to say that this is like a little bit more of the finished version. So you can see that here. Lost my finger. That's as far as my finger can go. Just like in SketchUp, staying organized in Photoshop is really, really important. And it kind of bugs me that I'm floating, so I'm going to anchor myself down now that I'm in Photoshop. If I just pulled everything off and we just built our way up, so we're just going to build our way up, and I'm just going to zoom in so that you can see a little bit of the detail, and I promise we're near the end here. The ground plane. So this is just the SketchUp color. I don't think I did this in my version. I can't remember. I maybe applied some colors to this, but basically this is my ground plane where I just need to know what is plaza, what is sidewalk, what is road, what is green space. So it's really simple because I know I'm going to put all the effects on top of this. And then the color, you can see there's not a lot of layers in Photoshop. The goal is to do it with as few as possible. And sometimes you have to do it with more, and then once you're happy, you merge it. And there's something therapeutic about merging it because you can't go back. It's like saying, like Brad's comment, like when you know you're done. When you know you're done, it's when you start merging things because you can't go back and change it. Unless you do a save as. Unless you do a save as, and then you start merging things. Then you can go back. But we don't have time. We don't have time to go back. That's it. You have to make a decision and you have to move on to the next decision. So
his follow-up comment was, when it comes to the time thing, you go until someone says ship it.
Yep.
And then Randy chimed in and says, or dinner's ready.
Dinner's ready. No, dinner shows up and then it gets cold and then you
kind of take a break real quick and then you keep going. Okay, so there's the color layers. It's just kind of adding in, again, the gradients. You can see that there's a gradient on the soccer field. It's just adding, you don't even need to do color. You can just do it as an overlay and set it to overlay. And then just let the colors from underneath the SketchUp model pop. And then what you're doing is just applying a gradient overlay. And that's really nice because it takes away that flatness, because SketchUp just treats it all as like one lighting and then it doesn't differentiate. And that's okay. That's what SketchUp does. So just taking the time to sort of put in some water drops and throw a couple of gradients, and it makes a big difference. It's not a lot of work. And then the CAD. In this case, I have the CAD information, but this can be just as much if you already have the CAD in SketchUp. It can go straight from SketchUp, or if you've modified it, or if the CAD is still sort of the more accurate or up to date, you can always just bring the CAD information into 2D. And that's why I said you didn't have to do this in 3D at all. You could have just gone straight from CAD to Photoshop. And to me, I don't like to do that anymore, but you could do that. And then some furnishings. If I zoom in, the furnishings are like, they don't really show up unless you zoom in. It's for like if you did a detailed enlargement of a section to show cars and to show light poles and bridges and, just kind of the things, at least in the key areas, maybe not everywhere. Umbrellas to show cafe seating. And then the property line. Again, the property line, maybe you don't show it in the final rendering, but it's just nice to have, especially if something shifts. You kind of always register it to the property line. And the trees, you'll notice the trees, I looked at it 2 different ways. We looked at replacing them, I think, with more photorealistic trees, but then you have to redo all that work that you've already done. So it's much better to just do it, just to keep them diagrammatic and use the trees from SketchUp. So that's it. So trees, yep. Different kinds of trees with different settings. The low trees, you might want them on a different tag than the high trees. And the reason why is because you can set the drop shadow at different distances. So if you have all the trees on one, or if you have all the buildings on one, then you're going to see that you can't differentiate the drop shadow very much. And the last is the buildings, which is kind of more important. You can see there's a few tags for the buildings. And the reason why is because of that depth. There's, doing the parapet wall and then casting an inner shadow that you wouldn't get from SketchUp because we didn't model it. Doing the AO, which is the ambient occlusion when it hits the ground, and then doing the little things like changing the shadow color, fading out the buildings to show what is taller and what is lower, and then also little things like tower tops. If you look here, let me show you here, if I just kind of really quickly, you can see that I don't know if I did this. I can't remember. I might have done this as a section cut, but sometimes I'll export the building at different heights. So I'll do a podium export and then I'll do a tower export. And because the reason why is because then you can start applying. You can see that I have a layer here for just the tall towers. And if you have all the buildings from the ground all the way to the top exported the same, then any filter effects or any shadows or any edges or anything, you can see that I will do the tower. I'll do them as like low, medium, high. So I didn't do that today, but sometimes sometimes it warrants that effort. Yeah. So I'm going to stop there because I wanted to end early today. So I'm going to.
It looks fantastic.
I'm going to stop there.
It really does.
Yeah. Any final comments that we should relate to the group, not just to me, but that would be good to everyone to hear. Otherwise, I will thank you all and we'll wrap up. So anything else, Donovan, that you want to say or that somebody else wanted to say that maybe we missed?
You kind of mentioned it earlier, but we still have quite a few people hanging out with us. We've been here for almost 2 hours now. Thank you for hanging out with us. We are so close to 500,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. If you haven't already, subscribe. Tell your friends if they haven't already subscribed. Help us reach that 500,000 mark. We're going to do something pretty special for it, and we can celebrate together then.
Yep. I don't know what we're going to do, but I keep saying we're going to do something special because that's just because I'm telling myself that I want to do something special. So I want to make sure that we do something special for our community as well. I don't know what that is. Maybe just a fun live stream. Maybe free gifts. Maybe my Photoshop filters. I'll upload them and send them to people, and you can download them from Dropbox. I don't know that anybody wants that, but we'll come up with something.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Let us know your thoughts in the chat. Yeah, what should we do when we hit 5,000? We want to do something to celebrate. Yeah, well, if there's anything else, I'll say that Tyson's going to be back with us. He's out of town this week, hopefully getting some vacay. And we will
we'll see what he's up to. I don't know what he's up to be honest with you. Hopefully he's inspired. He went someplace. I don't know if he's doing staycation or not, but we'll find out. And hopefully he'll have something to share with us next Friday. And it'll be fun for me to join in as a part of the I get to comment, instead of talk. It'll be great. Otherwise, everyone, thank you all for watching today. I hope, as I say always, as long as you learned one new thing, then I feel like this is a success. If any of you out there learned nothing new, shoot me a private message. We'll talk because, hey, I'll learn from you because, hey, I'm always trying to learn new stuff. So that's awesome. That's awesome.
I highly doubt that's the case, but as always, it was fun hanging out with you, Eric. It really was.
Thanks, Donovan. Thanks for managing the comments. Thanks for keeping me on track. Thanks for reminding me to save. And thanks everyone again one more time for attending from all around the world. I can't say bye in too many languages. I can say adios in Espanol. I can say arrivederci, which is in Italian. And I can just say we will see you next time, hopefully. With that, I'm going to go cue up some music. Stick around for a few minutes, at least for 3 minutes till this song ends, because that's what I'm going to do. So I will see you. We'll see you all next time. Thank you.